Today's video is brought to you by SimpliSafe. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Every year on this date since 2011, I've made a Pokemon related video in celebration of my first big break on this channel, the Lavender Town Theory. While my content has changed a lot since then, I've always been able to find stories to fit the mold, and this year is no exception as I delve into two crimes revolving around the famous franchise. Our first story today takes place in the small community of Interlachen, Florida. It was where Jerry Lee Allen Jr. grew up after being born in 1987. The young boy never knew his mother and was abandoned by his father in 1995. His grandparents raised him from the age of 8. Jerry was often bullied for his small stature, yet grew up to be caring and gentle. His grandma said he always picked up wounded birds and took them under his wing. If he saw someone sitting by themselves in the cafeteria and looked like they were upset or lonely, he would always make a point of going over to them and talk. He was just that kind of kid. He loved repairing bikes and played the flute. He received an award in band for practicing over and above the Call of Duty. But like many other kids his age, he also loved Nintendo and collecting Pokemon cards. Whenever Jerry attended C.H. Price Middle School, he always carried a considerable collection of these cards in his book bag, which he brought to the school's Pokemon Club. It seemed like, even with his tragic upbringing, he would go on to have a very promising and fulfilling future. However, this was all tragically cut short when, on May 26, 2000, he suddenly disappeared. After getting home from school that day, Jerry rode off on his bicycle around 3:30 p.m. He was supposed to return for dinner by 6, but never came back. This was immediately alarming to his grandparents. Jerry was responsible, predictable, and most of all, afraid of the dark. He'd never stay out this late. Within 30 minutes, his grandfather Marvin began searching. The man went everywhere the boy could have gone. That included 2 stops at the house of his grandson's latest friend, a 15-year-old named John Silva. The two rode the same bus to school together. He lived only a short distance away from the alleys in a mobile home with his family. They bonded over a shared love of video games and grew closer, trading Pokemon cards between one another. Marvin and his wife Annie let Jerry go to his house several times, even though it was a bit further out. John was even invited over on one occasion. The bus didn't go all the way to John's house, so Marvin sometimes went and dropped him off from school in his pickup truck. That's all to say they were very familiar with and trusted their grandson's friend. While searching for their missing child, he asked the teen if he'd seen Jerry since they got off the bus. John looked him straight in the eyes and told him no without hesitation. An hour later, Marvin reported Jerry's disappearance to police. The next day, law enforcement launched their own investigation into the matter. There was an immediate search effort due to both his age and the fact that everyone who knew him was sure he wouldn't voluntarily leave. They got hundreds of civilian volunteers, as neighbors gave up their entire Memorial weekend to find him. That was on top of the tracking dogs, helicopters, and firemen. For 3 days, they combed through every inch of the woods surrounding the tiny community. This extensive search found nothing though, and it truly seemed like he might never be found. Then on May 29th, a woman named Dawn Marie Bachman called police to report her dream. You see, 2 miles from the alley's home was a vacant, litter-strewn lot with an abandoned septic tank. It was popular amongst kids in the area who liked to use the structure as a fort. The area had been searched by an officer that noticed 2 sets of bike tracks nearby. There was an overwhelming odor which he attributed to the large amount of garbage. The policeman didn't notice the septic tank. The entrance was covered by an industrial pallet that appeared to be lying on the ground. It was about to be cleared until Dawn arrived with a strange story. The woman explained that after seeing the missing individual on a flyer, she saw him while sleeping. This nightmare showed the boy's battered body inside the so-called fort. The first to hear this was a volunteer fireman who told her that the lot was scoured a day before. But she was so insistent she offered to check herself if necessary. They walked through the forest until arriving at the aged plywood. He shined his light into the deep, dark hole and was horrified to discover the body of Jerry Lee Allen. There was an ace-elastic bandage around his neck, which was also used to bind his hands behind his back. The victim's body was obscured by his red and black bicycle. It laid next to his backpack, unzipped and empty, with a pair of scissors and a Pokémon card nearby. It wasn't long until law enforcement arrived, descending down the makeshift stairs. That's when they found a note written on loose leaf paper, which described a list to prepare Jerry. It read, strip to underwear plus wrap and tower, tie up hands, gag, and cover eyes. An autopsy revealed the boy died of strangulation mere hours after leaving home. They then obtained alibis and cleared all registered sex offenders in the area to move on to other possible leads. This left them with just one direction, as many believed the Silva house was the last place Jerry had been seen alive. It turns out that on the day of his disappearance, a friend of Silva's sisters saw John leave home. The teen had a grocery bag on the handlebars of his bike. He returned 30 minutes later, dirty and sweaty, without the bag. After Jerry's grandpa came by looking for him, she talked with her friend about where he could have gone. That's when John interjected, saying, "All I can say is that's a terrible way to die." It stood out because at the time, nobody knew that he had passed away. After the victim's body was found, she reported John's strange behavior to police. It was the break they needed, with the 15-year-old being brought in for interrogation. And as it turns out, this wasn't the first time speaking with authorities, as he voluntarily spoke to them a day prior. He admitted Jerry was at his house before the murder, but said the boy was looking for a 6th grader named Justin. He also denied having left home, but the day after the body was found, he once again spoke to police. John first stuck by his story about the so-called Justin. He recalled wanting to help, but not being able to due to a flat tire. He also tried blaming it on some pervert with a car. This changed over the next hour as his story began to shift once again. The teen admitted to accompanying Jerry to the vacant lot in question. They were apparently roughhousing nearby when the younger boy fell and hit his head. He encouraged Jerry to climb down into the tank to rest, only for him to fall and hit his head once more. This led the boy to bleed profusely from his forehead, which is why he used an ace bandage to try to soak up the blood. The interrogation lasted 3 hours, as John slowly conceded more details. When confronted with the fact that Jerry's hands were tied, he said it was so he wouldn't hurt himself. "I had the bandage with me because I injured my leg a few weeks ago. I tried to keep Jerry awake. I tied his hands in front of him to keep him from getting hurt. Then I got scared. I left him there after I threw his book bag and bicycle in after him." By the second hour, he had a message for Jerry's grandparents. "Tell them I didn't mean for this to happen. Tell them I'm sorry." This story, of course, didn't make any sense. When asked why he didn't call for help, he said he panicked. And there was a lot they didn't tell him amid questioning. They already determined his handwriting was identical to that of the note. Said note only had 2 sets of fingerprints, the victim's and John's. The autopsy showed signs of strangulation. There was no evidence of the supposed head injury he described. Following their interrogation, John Silva was placed under arrest and charged with the murder of Jerry Alley. The trial didn't begin until a year later due to numerous postponements. John was emotionless in his first court appearance, pleading not guilty. That changed as the trial progressed when it was ruled he'd be tried as an adult. The most difficult question was his motive. There were multiple theories, such as jealousy over a girl they both liked. It was also speculated the crime was related to Pokémon. During a search of his home, they seized an assortment of Pokémon items, including 2 3-ring binders of trading cards. The victim's book bag found with his body was empty. This is strange as Jerry's considerable card collection was missing from his room. It's unclear how many cards of which John owned prior to the crime. There wasn't much in the way of a defense. The note was inescapable, with his own mother seeing it days before the murder. He explained it at the time as being a practical joke. It instead proved premeditation though. Prosecutor Gary Wood pointed out in his closing arguments, he fulfilled every wish listed in the note. On February 19, 2001, the teenager was convicted of first-degree murder. He would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. He nearly collapsed upon hearing this, and had to be supported by his defense team. It's a sentence that will keep John Silva off the street so he won't be able to harm anyone again, Prosecutor Gary Wood said. He'll die in prison. When John was first arrested, the school year was about to end. They held a memorial service for Jerry in the gym, gathering 500 people. It was a tight-knit community, one in which everyone knew each other. Many of his former classmates came by the Alley's home over the summer to express their sympathy and grief. It's sad enough a friend was murdered so horribly. Then to find out a fellow student had done it that had ridden on the same bus and had the same classes with them, we have had many of the students come by really deeply broken up. I want them to know we are available to talk to all during the summer if it will help them. Deborah Spire, a local bar owner, held a fundraiser for the local school in Jerry's honor. It raised $2,000, which they used to purchase instruments for the school's music class. 2 student awards were also established in Jerry's honor. An award for a member of the band, and the Jerry Alley Citizenship Award. It was a fitting tribute to a boy that those who knew him said always wanted to help people. The abandoned lot was turned into a memorial with dried bouquets, a teddy bear with matted white fur, and a pocket-sized New Testament Bible atop a block of sandstone at the edge of the place where the 12-year-old boy was senselessly taken away. To this day, his Pokémon card collection has never been uncovered. But this is only one of 2 crimes we'll be covering today. We'll learn about the second after a brief word from our sponsor. Hey everybody, before I go forward with today's video, I'd like to give a shout out to my sponsor, SimpliSafe. As September rolls in and many families return to their regular schedules, with homes left empty during the day, it's important to consider the heightened risk of burglaries that occur in the fall. The good news is, SimpliSafe offers a robust solution to keep your home secure during this busy time. As a person myself who gets paranoid about someone breaking into my home or a water line breaking, I have SimpliSafe that helps protect me in case there's an emergency. SimpliSafe offers comprehensive security for the whole home, with advanced sensors and cameras to detect threats from break-ins to fires, floods, and more. And with them offering 24/7 professional monitoring, SimpliSafe agents are ready to spring into action to keep you safe, promptly assessing the situation. There's a reason why it was named among the best home security systems in 2024 by US News and World Report. And what I like most about them above the competition is their affordability. You'll never be locked into a long-term contract, so you can cancel anytime. And pricing is transparent and affordable, starting at less than $1 a day with no hidden fees ever. So if you want to try it out for yourself and save 50% on your system, plus a free indoor security camera, and your first month is free when you sign up for core monitoring, visit simplysafe.com/GFM to customize yours. The link is also provided in the description down below, and there is no safe like SimpliSafe. The Pokémon World Championship is an official event where players travel from across the globe to battle. It started in 2004 as the franchise regained popularity. While originally for only the trading card game, it expanded to include the video games in 2009. The tournament is held annually, requiring an invitation to compete. These qualifications are based on their performance at other events that season. This is no easy task though, having players navigate regional, state, and national level tourneys. It allowed only the very best that no one ever was to prove they were the Pokémon Master. That takes us to our second story for today, where we meet 18-year-old Kevin Noren, who grew up in the state of Iowa. While not much is known about his early life, some have described seeing warning signs from the adolescent from the get-go. The boy suffered from undiagnosed mental health issues, which resulted in bullying. This apparently went ignored by administrators. Kevin attended Ames High School, where he met a student named Angelica Parson. The two grew acquainted in freshman year, although she didn't step into his life in a more serious capacity until he made an attempt on his life. This led her to go to the school counselors for help, to no avail. He did have something wrong with him and needed help, and it's obvious he never got that. It was kind of proving to me that they weren't really going to be of assistance to me. I kind of felt like I was trying to save this kid's life on my own. The constant bullying and lack of action made it no surprise when Kevin didn't return to finish his senior year. With all the free time in the world, he began studying his favorite trading card game. By then, it was much easier to practice decks online using the service Pokémon Trading Card Live. It was through this he would meet another player from his state, a 27-year-old named James Stumbo. James was a seasoned trainer, having participated in tournaments since 2010. Through their love of Pokemon, the two became good pals, with Kevin helping research and build decks for him.
Well, shout out to Kevin Norton, who does a lot of my testing for me, because I actually don't. He's always on PTCGO testing deck ideas for me and working on the nitty-gritty stuff that I just don't feel like doing.
This was from an interview after James won first place at the Nebraska State's Tourney in 2015. He won another in Minnesota a few weeks later, this time using a card called Life Dew.
The big one I played would probably be Life Dew.
Okay.
It gave me an extra tool spot, as well as for Flareon and these not EX-based decks.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of gives you the edge when you can drop it down and they just don't get a prize.
The strategy was inspired by Kevin, who by this point he considered part of his crew.
I guess just my crew, Dane Schuler and Kevin Norton, given they had nothing to do with this. Other than play Life Dew because it's funny.
For his part, Kevin performed well on his own, competing and placing 7th place in Missouri. They would both end up qualifying for the 12th Pokemon World Championships in 2015. They were formally invited under the Masters division, alongside hundreds of others from 30 different countries. The prize pool had over $2 million in awards, with the first place of their bracket set to win $25 grand. Needless to say, the stakes were high and it was going to be a tough competition, and the event would unravel over the course of 3 days, from August 20th to August 23rd. It was to take place at the Heinz Convention Center in Boston, Massachusetts. Given they both qualified, it only made sense for the two friends to plan their journey together. Now, it must be understood that the top players in the US and Canada were eligible to win a travel stipend of up to $1,000. James applied and was granted the award on July 29th, bragging about it the next day. "Boys and girls, this is going to be a guns and strippers weekend," Kevin replied, "but imagine what you would do for $1,000. I approve of Pokemon's funding strip clubs." However, it seems the money wound up spent elsewhere. Thank you, Pokemon, for my new assault rifle. As it turns out, the two Iowans loved guns, with at least one of them being a hunter. They took photos brandishing their firearms, with the 18-year-old's profile pic showing him holding a pistol. This was a worrying combination when they began mouthing off their competitors online. As the date approached, Kevin is said to have started bullying another individual. This got him banned from a private chat room, which led him to state, "Oh, okay, that's fine then, I will just shoot him on Friday, thanks." The two were active in related communities on Facebook, such as the Mayhem Pokemon crew. It was well known for being uncensored, which attracted a lot of outrageous comments. The day before the event, though, they clearly went too far. On August 19th, James posted a photo of a shotgun and a rifle on the back of a car. "Kevin Norton and I are ready for Worlds Boston. Here we come." It read as a thinly veiled threat, with one user commenting, "Columbine Part 2. James replied, "Don't worry about it." To which the user said, "Just don't get mad when you lose the auto win." This led him to respond, "My AR-15 says you lose." If that wasn't bad enough, Kevin also had this exchange in the comments. User, "Good luck." Kevin, "With killing the competition?" User, "Haha, yes." This caught the attention of a moderator who immediately banned him before reporting it to the Pokemon Company. They then contacted their security firm, who quickly got law enforcement involved. It wasn't long before a no trespass order was issued against them for the event. The thing is, neither Kevin nor James were aware of this, embarking on the 25-hour drive to Boston. They arrived at the convention on August 20th at approximately 5 p.m. The two competitors tried to register only to be stopped by authorities. James entered first, where he was recognized and escorted out. That's when they noticed Kevin, with the two being questioned outside. When asked about his online comments, James claimed they were taken out of context. At the same time, Kevin told police where their car was parked and that it had weapons inside. They were unable to produce a gun license. This led officers to apply for an arrest warrant, but in the meantime, the two were released, returning to their motel. That's where they would remain as the tournament proceeded. It's worth noting that at this point, none of the investigation was made public, but players still noticed the event's increased police presence. The roughly 3,000 attendees were screened and had their bags checked. There were bomb dogs spread all throughout patrolling the perimeter. Detectives obtained a warrant the next day. They seized Kevin's 2002 Chevy Prism, discovering a 12-gauge Remington shotgun, an AR-15, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and a hunting knife. They were then arrested on charges of unlawful possession of a firearm and ammunition. It was made public later that day, with many headlines reporting the alleged shooting plot. The media sensationalized the story by calling them the Pokémon killers. In hindsight, though, there was actually a lot of misinformation surrounding this case. The Daily Mail at the time called them Columbine-inspired plotters, while ABC implied their threats referenced Columbine and the Boston bombings, even though the two never directly referenced those massacres. Those events were brought up in the replies to their comments and were left by someone else. They hadn't even been charged in connection to the online threats. There has since even been discussion over how legitimate of a danger they posed to the event. Many have speculated the threats were simply jokes in poor taste. It's very possible they were going to hit a gun range in Boston and made some incredibly short-sighted comments without realizing how it came across. After all, they were forthcoming about their messages and firearms to police. Of course, that doesn't change the fact that law enforcement did the right thing here. It was better they err on the side of caution just in case that assumption was incorrect. Regardless, the suspects appeared in court the next day where they had their comments read back to them.
Mr. Stumbo indicating my AR-15 says you lose. And then Mr. Norton indicated, oh, okay, that's fine, I will just shoot him on Friday.
The two men were held without bail, remaining in jail for nearly a year. They both eventually pled guilty. Kevin Norton and James Stumbo were sentenced on July 21, 2016, having to serve 2 years in prison as well as 2 years of probation. Kevin's attorney, Robert Leroy, called the episode an error in judgment.
He had a press conference later and he said he made an error in judgment.
They basically always drive around with loaded guns in the trunk in Iowa. He then said the messages were the result of a minor feud at a previous competition. It was pretty adolescent stuff, but it wasn't threatening in any capacity. The two were released in 2018, where they have largely stayed out of public sight. That is, however, until last year. With reports stating they were banned from Pokémon for life, it seems James Stumbo pivoted to a different franchise, the Star Wars X-Wing miniatures game. He performed well enough to qualify for the World Championship in 2023, even being interviewed on a podcast afterward. They actually would acknowledge his past, which at this point was nearly a decade ago.
Is there anything you want to say quickly about that, James, before we move forward and not discuss it? Because this is an X-Wing podcast.
About 10 years ago, made a mistake, and I've learned from that mistake. And if there's a community that's forgiving, I know it's this one. So, I've never met a nicer group of people. So,
it seems he finally found a community willing to let him move on from his mistake and finally go back to competing in a tabletop game, like he always wanted. So there you have 2 Pokemon-related true crime stories, and honestly, I'm starting to run out of ideas, so I don't even know what I'm going to come up with next year. But I can't help but keep this tradition alive, even if it's just for my own amusement.